All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining today. What I've done is I've actually combined this webinar. It principally focuses on financial tools, business planning tools that are going to help you plan and be sustainable in the immediate and kind of intermediate term. And what I've also done is incorporated some of the curriculum that we are covering in the prioritizing bills and managing deferments webinar. So I've also got some strategies in here that you can incorporate to help you manage your expenses, think about diversifying your income, increasing your income, adjusting your business models, and staying profitable through these challenging times. So I'm going to start. One of the things about this webinar is we're going to share tools with you. So I'm kind of going to go back and forth from my slides and show you these spreadsheets that we've created that we think can be very helpful tools for you. And then at the end, we'll kind of work together and do a little cash flow projection and budgeting, test a few scenarios, just to give you an idea of how you can work with these tools to determine what's the very best strategy for you and your business and your team. So I'm going to share my screen and start with my slides. Okay, yes. So cash flow planning, financial tools and strategies to get you through the COVID-19 crisis. This is part of our recovery coaching program at Newtown, Macon. And we're going to look at 3 different kinds of financial planning tools today. So the first is going to be a cash flow. We're calling it a cash flow gap projection because we do think, unfortunately, right now, due to disruptions to everything from supply chains to shelter-in-place orders that have forced some of you to close, that you're going to experience some significant drops in your income and shifts in your expenses. So we need to determine what kind of loss you might be experiencing in the upcoming quarter and to what degree. So that's the cash flow gap projection. And then we're going to do some budgeting work. We're going to look at some ways, some strategies that you can put in place to help increase income and lower expenses so that you can still be profitable. And then a budget becomes also a reference tool for you to continue to look back at and be sure you're bringing in the money that you need to, keeping your expenses at a level where you will remain profitable in the months ahead. And then the last tool that we're going to look at is a cash flow analysis. And this is a week by week look at the income coming in and the bills due. And this is simply to be sure, because maybe for the more immediate future, you're going to be okay when you look at the big picture, but you may not have money in the bank at the time you need it to pay bills. So we need you to be able to identify where you might come into some cash flow crunch issues, and if you need to juggle some expenses or make sure that you deposit some savings over into your checking account so that you can be sure you have the money on hand to pay any expenses that come due. So the first tool is going to be the cash flow gap projection. What you need to do to get started with this is determine a typical monthly operating, your income and your expenses. And this, is either a look back at a couple months before COVID-19 and disruptions to your business and your supply chain, or maybe to even look back at this exact same time last year. Some of us are more seasonal with our business models, and it might be more helpful to look at what this time last year looked like for you. So if you work with any kind of your own accounting software, QuickBooks Online, maybe Xero, another cloud-based accounting software program, or if you have an accountant, that's going to be the easiest tool to use to help you determine these numbers, just running a couple average months. If you don't work with an accountant, then the next easiest thing may be to pull up your tax returns, your most recent filed tax returns, look at your annual income and your annual costs for your business, and then divide that by 12 so you can at least get a general sense of what a typical month looks like as far as income and costs go. And then you may also want to supplement that, or if you don't have a tax return, if you're a newer business, then the next thing you're going to need to do is refer to bank statements. And even if you only have tax returns, you may at least want to look at a few bank statements to really break down your spending in particular by category. So once you have a sense of your typical month and income, typical monthly income and expenses, we want you to do another exercise before we run the cash flow gap. So hopefully a lot of you have started already having these conversations, but all the businesses that we've been working with, we encourage you to contact all your lenders, vendors, suppliers, and determine if there are any payments that you can suspend or reduce. And we also really encourage you, if you haven't done this yet, to keep track of the payments that you've been able to defer and any kind of conversations that you've had related to that. So you can see this worksheet here, and this is one of the worksheets that we're going to provide you, a deferment worksheet where we confirm if we've gotten a deferment, if we got any kind of order number, what the amount was, and how many months. So far, these are common expenses that businesses that we've worked with have been able to defer. Landlords have been very flexible. A lot of banks who hold your payments, depending on the kind of mortgage that you have, some of the federal mortgages, they're even required to let you suspend your payments. A lot of lenders are being very flexible right now and letting you reduce your payments, do interest only. Some credit cards are letting you do that as well. And wholesalers or suppliers. Just yesterday, Cox and AT&T announced that they are going to extend their pledge to not cut off service to small businesses or charge late fees. So that period is now going to run through June 30th. It was initially supposed to just run through May 15th. It's been extended another 6 weeks. So that's an expense that if you need to shave something off, you can defer and you won't even be charged any late fees. And some of the professionals that you work with, and a business accountant or your web designer, we're all experiencing struggles because of COVID-19. And our experience has been that everybody's willing to work with you to help keep you in business and help keep you sustainable. And you should definitely keep a paper trail. If you had a conversation with someone on the phone, ask for an order authorization number. If you didn't get an email to confirm the deferment, send a follow-up email yourself to the company or the landlord or the lender, just so you have your own paper trail, and keep those files somewhere and keep some notes on your deferment worksheet. I'm going to show you what the spreadsheet looks like that we created for this. So again, you see yes, no, pending, your typical month, and your deferral, how many months. Deferment is spelled funky there, it looks like, but I guess that's actually right. Deferment confirmed, any order authorization number. But then at the bottom of this sheet, something that we want you to really consider is the fact that a deferment is not forgiveness. So at some point, these payments are going to come back and be due, and it may increase your monthly payments at that time. So on all the worksheets that we're going to provide you today, we have also created a sample just so you can see what a typical small business would look like entering this kind of information in. And you can see in the case of this business, they've deferred 3 months of rent and some internet and cable, like I mentioned, and some of their loan and credit card payments. So they are going to have some future debt that they're going to need to think about addressing after you get past the first quarter or so here. So this worksheet will also help you keep that number in mind as you negotiate these deferments. Because as we keep working with you guys moving forward, part of your business plan is going to have to be, generating enough income to address this future debt. So let me go back here. Yeah, so forgiven means that you will not have to pay them back. That would be a grant. Some of the federal programs are providing at least portions of their loans that are forgiven. Not many utilities or rent payments are going to be forgiven. They're just going to be deferred. So once you have that information, your typical income and expenses, and you determine right now what payments can I reduce, and also spend some time looking at your numbers to get a realistic idea of what your income is right now, since our shelter in place orders and the other disruptions that you face because of COVID-19. And then you're going to get a typical month loss here. And you're just going to take that number, jumped ahead there, and project it out for 3 months just to get a rough estimate of what your upcoming quarterly net loss will likely be. So this sheet, this cash flow gap worksheet, this is probably of the all the worksheets that we're going to share with you is the most critical one. So on all of these worksheets, and we'll spend more time in this one at the very end, there's a blank one where you can go in and fill it all out. And with all of these, you're going to have to go to File, because it is a Google Doc, and make a copy to be able to get in there and work, because all the public versions of these worksheets are locked. So you will have to make a copy. And here's another sample business here where we've gone in and filled in this worksheet so you can get an idea of what this looks like. But this business, prior to the pandemic, was running an average of $20,000 a month in income, and now it's reduced significantly, only 10% of what they were doing prior to the pandemic. But they've also managed to reduce a whole lot of costs in light of operating at such a smaller rate. So in this case, this business went from profiting just around $11,000 a month to losing just over $1,000 roughly. And so that cash flow need for this business likely in the upcoming quarter, the next 3 months, is going to be around $3,500. So once you have an idea of what your cash flow gap is going to be for the upcoming quarter, then we start to get into the budgeting piece here. So when it comes to budgeting, there are 3 ways that you address your cash flow gap. Okay, the first relates to income. So there are a number of relief programs, some private, some federal programs, and then some private nonprofit programs that could be available to you, as well as hopefully maybe some business savings or some available credit on a line of credit that you already have with a lender. Identifying new income streams or enhancing existing income streams. And then the hardest of the 3, identifying ways to cut costs. So step 1 here is where you're going to think about, where are there relief sources of income that I can access right now or in the immediate future? So in the example of this business, they have $1,000 in a business savings account that they can use to help address their cash flow gap. And an economic injury disaster loan advance that they just got. They have 2 employees, so they received $2,000. And on that idle advance, that's a forgiven amount of that loan. They do not have to pay that back. So that's $2,000 that they can simply add onto their balance sheet. Now, if you have applied for any SBA monies and you haven't been awarded them yet, I would be careful about going ahead and counting on them until they do show up into your bank account. But if you've had a conversation with a lender and they tell you it's coming, you know, then you can go ahead and run a scenario where you can count on it, but be careful about counting on any income source that hasn't been confirmed yet. So on that same worksheet where I just was, we took that same business that I just showed you as a sample, and we added this in. So this is at the bottom of the cash flow gap worksheet. And so by simply realizing that you've got access to that $3,000, you've already really significantly reduced the amount of cash flow gap that you're anticipating. So now this business really just has to identify $500 to at least break even in the upcoming quarter. So that sources to cover your need or your cash flow gap comes at the very bottom of this cash flow gap worksheet.
I got a question.
Yes.
The $2,000, is that a one-time thing or is that monthly?
That's a one-time thing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And so, and what we'll do shortly when we play with some budget scenarios is we'll take that one-time cost and we'll see if it's something that we can just spend on the business right away. But depending on the cash flow gap and how the expenses come due, you may need to try to pace how you use that money, you know, treat it as savings so that you can just at least break even or maybe start operating again in the black versus in the red, like this business is currently doing. So great question. And we'll dive a little deeper on that shortly.
Thank you.
Mhm. Now, the other thing to think about are new income streams. And this is something that we're focusing on specifically in other webinars, both live ones that we're doing with our Downtown Merchants Weekly, but also some of our recorded webinars that are in our webinar library. The reality is that our business models are going to change for good, even once we have a vaccine. So a digital e-commerce piece of your business is just going to be really critical to staying relevant and to diversifying your income stream. So are there ways that you can enhance your e-sales or maybe create them for the first time? Curbside pickup, have you been offering that to your customers? And if you haven't, we highly encourage you to think about ways to start bringing that in. Virtual events, especially if you're a nonprofit, are going to be a really important way to continue to engage your donors and whoever you may be of service to as part of that nonprofit. So I really recommend on this income stream, either think about enhancing existing income streams or creating new ones, that you check out not only some of the other recovery coaching program webinars that we're offering, but also check out our webinar library, especially our how to set up an online shop, which is on our YouTube channel. And you can get to all that by this link that I just pulled up on the PowerPoint slide. And then the last piece and the hardest piece is cutting your costs. And so we've created a bill prioritization ladder here that starts with meeting your legal obligations first and foremost, then determining what expenses do I need to pay to support my income streams or enhance them. Then what do I need to pay so that I don't have any necessary or unnecessary costs to my business? And then the hardest part of all, determining what really are your essential operating costs. So when it comes to legal obligations, the two critical pieces here are your Georgia sales tax and your federal payroll tax withholdings. Both of these are considered trust funds. You're legally essentially just holding them for the government. That's not your money. You're just holding it before you pass it on to them. And there are no programs on the Georgia sales tax where you're going to be forgiven to pay these or that you're going to be permitted to pay them late. So if you don't have the cash to pay your sales tax due, you still need to show that you're putting your that you're intending to pay it. So you must file and pay as much as you can and when you can to show the state government that you're really committed to paying that money that really belongs to them. So prioritize Georgia sales tax and also prioritize your federal payroll tax withholdings. Governments move slow. We were having a conversation about this before the webinar started, but when they show up, it can be a lot of trouble. I mean, they may really be coming to shut you down. So you don't want to be putting in all this hard work and not pay your taxes and find out that you can't continue to operate. So really prioritize these. And if you don't have the cash on hand, communicate, let them know that you're trying, work out a payroll plan with them so that you can continue to operate and be in good standing with the state and federal governments. So from there, then what bills do you need to pay to rebuild or keep your revenue streams going? If you're brick and mortar storefront, that's going to be your rent and mortgage. Whether you're brick and mortar or you're just an online business, there's no doubt that your website, any kind of e-store subscription that you have is going to be critical to maintaining. Insurance, I mean, if you're doing delivery or if folks are coming in, you don't want disruptions to your insurance where you could run into trouble and not be able to provide the services or goods that you've promised your customers. And of course, anything related to the inventory that you need to create sales. And then from there, are there services that you need to pay so that you won't be charged a disruption or startup fee? Now, our understanding based on conversations with a lot of small business owners right now is that our utility providers are being very flexible, but you must have a conversation with them, because what you don't want to find out is that it's perfectly fine to turn off your water and then you have some unbelievable startup fee. So utilities are a big one to look into for yourself here. Disruptions to insurance could be costly to you depending on what you get into. And credit cards, some credit card holders, and depending on the relationship you have and how you stand with your debt, you could really put yourself in a bad position if you continue to defer on your expenses here. So you need to explore those things for yourself. And then lastly, the hardest piece of all is taking a look at all your typical expenses prior to the pandemic and determining what are essential. And this is a hard question to ask, but what I would do right now is say, what expenses will not contribute to my current revenue streams, right? Because this is likely looks different than what it did prior to the pandemic. So my post-pandemic business model, what are the expenses that I definitely need to keep paying to bring in revenue? And the other ones that I'm paying that don't right now, you need to look at either cutting out entirely or at least reducing. So some common expenses that may fall under this umbrella: membership induced to professional groups, television service. I know a lot of us like to have TV for our customers or our employees, but it's not a necessary amenity. Office supplies, investing in new furnitures or fixtures. Now's a good time just to maintain and see what happens. And I'm gonna take it off here, the share, and show you for 1 second. My favorite couple books these days is by this guy, Mike Malkovich. Profit First and Toilet Paper Entrepreneur are two of the easiest reads I've seen around managing money right now, and how to be frugal, but also profitable in a way that I think is realistic. And so I recommend these reads if you're looking for something to really help you walk through the process of cutting costs and managing your money and your profits. So let me go back to share screen again. I lost my cue. Okay. Okay, and so once you have all those, then you get to do the fun work of running a 3-month model. So you're going to incorporate your cash flow or bootstrapping strategies that we just went through. It's 3-pronged, right? Looking at relief sources on your income, diversifying your income, or adding new income streams, and then cutting your expenses. The great thing about running these budgets and these models is you can test different scenarios. And that's what we're going to take a little time to do together at the end, because it just really depends for each entrepreneur, each business owner, which scenario right now makes sense. For some of you, collecting unemployment and closing your doors is going to be the best thing to do. For others of you, getting a PPP loan and staying fully staffed for the months ahead is going to be the right way to go. So you can use this budget, this 3-month model, to test some scenarios. And then when you determine the one that's the best for you, you devise that plan, you're going to keep referring back to that. And that's going to be your tool to stay profitable in the months ahead. So let me show you what that sheet looks like real quick. So the cash flow gap budget worksheet, here's what it looks like blank. So right now we're looking at the next 3 months of May, June, and July. And so here's one where a business is just gradually increasing their revenue sources, and they've added a second one. And they're using the economic injury disaster loan. Again, Bill, you asked earlier, this is a one-time income injection here. And then I put this as unemployment, but this is actually supposed to be a savings account that they're using over the next 2 months. And so what they've managed to do here is look at it month by month, realizing that their business is going to grow slightly each month, and managed to actually operate in the black. Nothing like what they were doing before. This is a business we showed you that was doing $10,000 previously, but they're building back up to it, and they're not operating in the red, which is what their initial projection looked at prior to incorporating some of those budgeting tools and techniques I just went over with you. So let me show you this last tool that I want to share with you. So that's the budget. And in this case, this nonprofit that we have as an example in the slide went from operating in the red, a deficit, to operating in the positive or in the black. So the last tool is cash flow analysis. So that's that weekly look. Do I have enough cash on hand to pay my bills? The most important piece of this tool is to determine your exact cash balance for the start of your work week. So you're going to need to choose a specified start date. So in this case, next Monday, I believe, is May the 4th. So if you were to say, I'm going to start running my cash flow analysis on May the 4th, you need to look at all your cash account balances, determine if you've just deposited any money that you need to account for, or if you're going to have any debits, so you can get that actual cash balance. You need to figure that out to have an accurate and helpful cash flow analysis. And then you're just simply going to think about each week. So May the 4th kind of depends on when your bills come due, but it's the first full week of the month. Often the end or the start of the month is when we have a lot of expenses due. So what's my starting balance? What income am I going to bring in on this week? And what bills am I going to have come due? And then depending on your ending balance, you're going to just carry that over to your starting balance, right? So my ending balance the week of, in this case, of April 13th is going to be my starting balance the week of April 20th. And so that sheet is the final worksheet. So the third worksheet, here's what it looks like blank. Okay, starting with your 13-week cash flow. And in this case, we started a business off the week of April 20th. So if you'll see what happened with this business, and this is pretty likely, they're going to run into some cash flow issues early in the month because more bills are coming due. So even though this business figured out how to be profitable month by month with their budgeting techniques, they're still going to run into some cash crunch issues at the beginning of May, and then just a little in June. But as they start to ramp up, they're going to have more cost increase with bringing staff back on and increasing sales. And so they're looking at a little bit of a cash flow gap issue again come early July. So you can see how this is going to be really helpful to a business owner when it comes to planning, to realize, okay, these months are going to be extra tough. This might be when I need to bring that $500 over from my business savings account so that I can pay all these bills the week of July 6th. So last two slides actually, before we play around in one of these. Two things to keep in mind. One is liquidity. So what you may find is when you run that cash flow analysis is that there's just going to be some bills that you're going to need to put on your credit card, so you simply have the cash on hand. So that's why that cash flow analysis, that weekly look, is going to be really important. You may not want to go in debt. You may not want to put charges on your small business credit card, but you just may have to be liquid and have what you need on hand to pay your top priority bills. The other thing is that this same strategizing applies to your personal finances. And there's a really helpful website that I learned about called findhelp.org, and you can plug in your zip code, and there's a range of assistance available there for you to know about and be aware of that relates specifically to your household expenses. And I was actually surprised in particular to find out how many programs are out there for veterans. So if you're a veteran, or if you have any friends, family who are, really recommend that they go use this tool. But you're going to want to use the same kind of system of prioritization to think through your household expenses and your personal finances. Okay, so in summary, the cash flow gap projection. This is a tool we want you to use to help you determine if you're going to experience any losses. Right now, we're just looking at the next 3 months and what level of loss are you going to be working with. So once you have a grasp of that, then you're going to be able to identify where you can bring in income, reduce costs, and test some different strategies so you can get the best plan in place to keep your business profitable in light of all the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then that last piece, that 13-week cash flow, is really to be sure that you have the cash on hand, that you have the liquidity to pay your bills as they come due. So before I show you a couple of scenarios in the cash flow gap budget worksheet, let me look and check my Zoom. I haven't been paying close attention to my chat and see if we've got any questions here. Okay. Okay, so I got the first question is, what's the difference between forgiven and deferred? So trying to emphasize that, but this is going to be really important for folks to keep in mind, because forgiven means you do not have to pay it back. Think grant essentially versus loan, right? Because deferred, And in some cases, folks are going to let you not pay at all. In other cases, they're just going to let you pay a reduced amount. For instance, what's going to be really common with a loan is that they're going to let you just pay interest only, but your principal balance is going to remain the same. And if they don't make adjustments to your loan term, if they don't extend it, then it's likely that your loan payment is going to be larger on the other side of this, right? So that's why it's so important to use that deferment worksheet and keep track of it, and also keep track of the conversations you have with your lenders and your suppliers, because you need to have a good sense of what kind of impact it's going to have on your expenses on the other side of this, because at some point these deferment periods are going to expire, and that's going to put you in a different position as far as your costs. And the second question here is, I run a nonprofit and I'm thinking about asking our donors to release grants so that I can spend them on operations. How can I convince them to let me? So yeah, we've had this a few times, and our understanding is there's a lot of foundations out there who are willing to consider it. But what we really recommend is that you use these tools. That cash flow gap projection and budget sheet in particular are going to be powerful and convincing tools for you to go to your foundation and say, look, I've run the numbers. I've got a $10,000 cash flow gap come July and August. That's just the amount of money I have in this grant that you gave me. If you allow me to convert that money over to my operations, I'm going to be able to stay afloat and continue to do the good kind of programming that you like to see us do. So that's why we think these tools are so powerful, because A, they're going to help you have your eyes wide open, but they're going to assure your donors that you've got a good handle on what you're working with, and that if they do convert it over, it really could make a difference. I think it's hard for donors if they can't tell if making that conversion is really going to make a difference. But if you can make that case that, yeah, we'll stay afloat if you make that conversion for us, that's going to be a lot more convincing. And then I see as a third question here, what about partial payments? Should I attempt to run numbers to do partial instead of deferments to avoid the balloon? Yeah. And then I also, she asked me to re-show the book, and I'll do that at the very end. But absolutely. And one of the scenarios we'll look at here that I want to show you, if you get the payroll protect, as an example, the Paycheck Protection Program loan, some of that money can go toward your rent. So that loan may help you make payments on costs that otherwise you would have to defer. And if that is something you can do and bring your staff back on terms that are agreeable to your staff, then that's going to be preferred. So anything you can do to not push debt further forward is certainly going to be ideal, especially if you can figure out a strategy that will allow you to meet those bills. Since I might not be as profitable as I was before, can I still restart operations without ending my unemployment benefits? So first of all, we run a recovery coaching program webinar on unemployment, and I really recommend that you watch it. It's going to be important. I just think right now, any of us who know more about how the unemployment program works, it's going to be helpful for ourselves and our colleagues, as well as friends and family in our network. The way the unemployment program works is you can get money from that program as long as it's reduced, if your income is reduced compared to what you were making prior to the pandemic. So there are ways that you could combine unemployment along with making some money. But what I want to do here in my little spreadsheet is run a couple of these scenarios like you're just asking, because it's going to be different for everyone. For some of you, maybe because of family concerns or what have you, collecting that unemployment and just being closed down for a couple months, even if it means less money for you, is going to be preferred to, say, staying open full throttle and trying to make it work with the Paycheck Protection Program. So let me show you a few of these examples that I have in here. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Yeah, so I ran a couple of scenarios related to exactly these kinds of questions. So in this first one that I showed you earlier, this business owner applied for the economic injury disaster loan and got a $2,000 advance, and they had that $1,000 savings on hand, right? And so this business model also assumed that they were going to gradually increase business. They found a second income stream that they didn't use prior to the pandemic, and they're slowly rebuilding and reopening and at some point maybe bringing their staff back on. One thing that's interesting here, I'll highlight this line because this is an important line to keep an eye on. The owner's compensation kind of varies a little on this plan too, just because of bills that have to come due so that they can stay somewhat profitable at the end. So the owner had to get paid just a little less than the month before just to slightly operate in the black. So that's a variation where they're slowly ramping business back up. They're getting closer there. This is about half capacity of what they were prior to the pandemic by July. But let's do a scenario where this person decided to do the Paycheck Protection Program. Okay. So with the Paycheck Protection Program, you keep some of the monies there going on. And then if you look at, I already did the calculations, and realistically, based on the kinds of salaries that this business had prior to the pandemic, they would get about $7,500. So I split their income up from the PPP between 2 months, which is very realistic because if you did apply for this program, if you know anything about it, once the monies get dispersed, you have to use it within 8 weeks. So you need to show that you're going to use that loan award within 2 months of disbursement. So in this case, I also kept the business going up just slightly. And so the cost of goods stayed about the same. You have to bring an employee back like you did previously. So I'm testing that scenario here. And in this case, I went from 24, so I got to go up and pay myself a little more the first couple months. Now, July, after the PPP money's gone, my pay is going to have to go down a little bit. But one of the things that I could do here is also pay more on my rent the next 2 months. So I just saved myself $2,000 in debt moving forward. And this program, there are a few other variations here when you bring in someone else back on staff, but I also showed them going back up on their loans here because you can put some of your PPP toward your loan payments to any debt. So you can see that, actually this is typically $550. So you can see that here, if I play with this, and there are a few other things that I tweaked that made these about break even. But if you use the PPP, it's not a bad option for bringing that kind of money back and actually reducing the amount of debt that they're going to have on the other side, because they were able to use some of their PPP monies to start paying their full rent and mortgage and expense starting June. And then I tried a scenario where I just closed this business down and we did unemployment. So unemployment. And I showed just roughly, and this is actually probably a little bit of an underestimate between a true 30 days, a true 30-day month, but we'll put it like that. And I also included unemployment and the idle, but I split it up. And in this case, I actually did not indicate that they had any, yep, 350. So they have to space that idle money again, just to stay in the black here. But no cost of goods. You don't bring that employee back. And then you have to reduce your owner's compensation here. And you also are not going to defer, or you're going to continue to defer. And what did I take out as well? I took out payroll taxes. Yeah. Marketing goes away. I left insurance. I took electric down significantly because my store's not open. My water's down to, if I'm closed, that's 25, not 250. I kept my internet off. I left that professional fee. That's because you may have to start pay an accountant to file those July taxes. And then I left this deferred as well. So in this scenario, they're just slightly in the black, but this could be a compelling scenario for someone if they file for the unemployment, they split their EIDL up between the 3 months. Again, their owner's compensation is reduced, but they're simply going to be able to just close up shop for 3 months and wait and see what happens, and maybe use that time to do some business planning and be able to open up and be more profitable. But you can see here how using this tool can help you really think through the different scenarios of, should I close down for a while and accept unemployment? Should I be closed for a while and let my colleagues get unemployment? Or should I go ahead and take that PPP loan? Or can I avoid using the PPP loan altogether and just use my savings and my economic injury disaster loan advance? And then go up with a scenario that makes the most sense for you. Just because this scenario ends up just slightly in the hole, just a little bit in the red, still may be the best choice for some of our entrepreneurs out there. Maybe less stress and easier on you and your household right now to go with that strategy. And those samples are in that, those numbers right there that I showed you are all in the version of the spreadsheet that we have to share with you. So in the public version of this, you can see these different versions just to see the kind of samples that I've showed you here and how you might play with your different income streams and your expenses. But definitely keep an eye to how much you're deferring, and any scenario you can do where you can not push too much debt off to, the future is going to be ideal. So I'm going to show you this book one more time while I'm remembering. This is one of my favorites that I've read, Mike Malkovich, Profit First. And he's got a sister book called Toilet Paper Entrepreneur. It came out first. And that's a little bit more just on the cash management and expense management piece. And this also includes some interesting ideas around how to just be sure you're really setting aside money and making sure that you make a commitment to being profitable. And that's certainly a hard thing for small business owners to do. But one of my favorite things about his work is that it's very easy to follow and easy to read. And I think that we're all overwhelmed informationally right now. So having simple tools to work with is ideal. So do you guys have other questions about these tools or different scenarios that might be relevant to you or other small businesses? No, looking good. Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining us, and please know that you can follow up with us. Because this is being filmed, let me put the links in here, the bit links, but we'll figure out a way to make these resources also available on our website. So let me put those in there real quick. Here's the first one coming to you. This is the deferment worksheet. There's that link. Let me type what it is just so it's clear. Oh, okay. Josh has already got me on that. He's going to add them into the YouTube description. So I don't need to put the bit links in, right? Cool. Okay. Thanks, everybody.